From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
And we have returned. We promised you something terrifying, or warned you about something terrifying. And here it is. First, I'm well aware that many of our fellow listeners today are undergoing what I would call COVID fatigue. You've heard about it so much in the news. It has altered your life, whether or not you got vaccinated, whether or not you were infected with COVID-19 Prime, I'll call it. It's an Amazon's in my head, or one of the many variants that are proliferating across the planet as we speak. There's a new problem in town, and it's one that's been rumored for a while. I'll give you the headlines, give you the rough ins and outs of it, and then I'd love to get Matt, Noel, you all's thoughts, as well as you, fellow conspiracy realist. So you probably know someone who contracted COVID. They may have had serious, even fatal symptoms. They may have been asymptomatic and only found out that they were infected after they received a test that indicated antibodies in their system. But you know, at this point, you know someone who contracted COVID or variant somehow, and you may have watched your loved ones discover the unique nature of how this virus affected them. You know, some people say, I have a shortness of breath. Some people are experiencing what we've now come to call long COVID, right? And long COVID would be symptoms or problems that continue after the infection has left someone's body. And those are still things like shortness of breath, maybe lethargy, and so on. There are, as we record today, there's still tons of studies being conducted to figure out exactly what your life is going to look like, 20, 30 years down the line after you've been infected with COVID or a COVID variant. And there's a new study that just got published in The Lancet, or in a journal of The Lancet called eClinical Medicine. Don't let the dry, very unsexy name fool you. This is important. The findings suggest that COVID can produce substantial reductions in cognitive ability. And it seems to be in step, it seems to be lasting, and it seems to be in step with the severity of the illness on the individual basis. Another scary thing about this, I found out about it pretty much by coincidence. The lead researcher, a guy named Adam Hampshire, was he was collecting a large scale set of mental and cognitive health data as part of something called the Great British Intelligence Test. And so I want to pause here, so I'm not monologuing, but you guys, we all know someone who contracted COVID, right? Do we know anybody who experienced serious symptoms?
No, I mean, like I said, I tested positive for the COVID antibody. I don't really know when I got it, but I apparently did. And I've known quite a few people who've gotten it with varying degrees of symptoms. I have a very good friend who was probably the most careful of anyone that I know. Never left his house. He and his partner must have gotten it from going to the grocery store one time, or from literally taking a walk down the street and passing through a cloud of aerosolized COVID, or aerosolized, breath from maybe a jogger or something like that. Literally, just we've gone round and round. It's like, what could it have been? So yeah,
there's somebody just close in my personal sphere who experienced long COVID, I suppose you would say, lingering effects of the infection.
Yeah. And let's keep them in our thoughts, as well as everybody else who is currently fighting off the virus that causes COVID. Here's what happened in this study that Adam Hampshire was going to be conducting anyway. It's very important to know that. He didn't set off to find this. The test is composed of a series of tasks that are designed to measure just different dimensions of cognitive ability. Think like a less biased IQ test. We should probably also do an episode on the IQ test at some point. But while they were conducting this test, determined stuff like quantitative intelligence, memory retention, short-term stuff, like remember these 7 numbers or something. Just by the way, 7 is one of the easy numbers of digits for people to remember, which is why phone numbers in the US minus the area code are 7 digits. If you ever think about that, it's easy for our brains to work with them.
Nice.
But we don't need to remember phone numbers now, right? We've got 911 and then 1833 STD WYTK. Those are the only 2 numbers that anyone in America bothers to remember today.
That's right. And you could just put it in your phone and just call it STD. And then your parents or whoever you hang out with will go, sorry, why do you have STD in your phone?
And why do you call so much? And they'll be like, you have a mysterious, enigmatic, and adventurous life. You, my friend, are dangerous. Well, it's funny. We can talk about memory later because this does apply to this conversation. I bet that those of us in the crowd today who are old enough to remember the time before ubiquitous smartphones and mobile devices, I bet you probably remember phone numbers from your ancient past. Like you probably remember your parents' home phone number, even if you have a smartphone. If you don't remember your parents' number, memorize it now, just in case. You probably remember like friends you had when you were growing up before you were allowed to have smartphones. I don't know what age kids get them now. But
dude, I just remembered seriously, and you saying that, my friend, my like school age young friend that I grew up with, that number just flashed before my eyes, and I have not thought about it since elementary school. Holy crap. That was amazing, Ben. Sorry.
Oh no, your brain is amazing because it kept it. What an amazing organ. Our brains are hoarders of information, and they should be. Some part of your brain was like, we should keep that just in case. Just don't throw it away just yet. You never know. But of course, we won't say the number on air, but I'm sure you remember it explicitly. So what happened is while Hampshire is gathering this information, some of his colleagues, he says, contacted him during this time to say, hey, this is also a golden opportunity to figure out how the pandemic and COVID-19 may or may not be affecting mental health and cognition. And he had been thinking about this, so he wanted to help as much as he could. So he put an extension onto the study to include information about COVID-19. They talked with a lot of people, over 81,337 participants. And these folks did the test between January and December of 2020. Of the entire sample, there were 12,689 individuals who said they had experienced COVID-19 with some degree of respiratory severity. That sounds like a small number, and it is, but we have to remember this is January and December of 2020. And so things were still a little bit different. The situation was evolving. And what they found is spooky because they said, all right, we've controlled for all the other intervening variables, age, sex, whether they're right or left-handed or ambidextrous, what language they speak, how much education they have, et cetera, yada, yada, yada. And after accounting for all of that, getting the best baseline they could, they found that people who contracted COVID-19 tended to underperform on this intelligence test compared to people who had not contracted the virus. The biggest deficits were on tasks that required planning, problem solving, and reasoning. And this goes into one of the other symptoms of long COVID that people have reported, which they called brain fog. And
I know that symptom well.
I mean, did you have it?
No, hopefully not COVID related, but it's just, I call it the Mondays. But I can totally imagine what it might be. It's just sort of like a bit of a haze, not being able to connect the dots, and in your day-to-day problem solving difficulty, I imagine. Stop me if I'm way off base, but it's pretty great name for something I think we can all understand.
Well, yeah, I wonder how common that is just in this era of anyone who has gone, lived through as an adult the quarantine process and the pandemic in general. I wonder, I would, if I was being asked, I would say, yeah, I'm experiencing a lot of brain fog lately. And I would probably attribute it to all of that, just feeling not normal, I guess, as much of the past year and a half or so has been not normal. So everything feels weird. Anyway, but I can totally see why that brain fog, again, the person I'm close to reported that exact symptom while they were dealing with the immediate post-COVID effects.
I see. And you don't have to have COVID. You guys are raising an excellent point. You don't have to have COVID to experience something like brain fog, because during the pandemic, a lot of the routines that people use to define the passage of time are removed. I would be surprised if there was anybody who experienced the lockdown and always remembered what day it is, because the peek behind the curtain, as we say on this show, there were months where I just knew what day it was based on whether or not I was recording with these guys.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. I was like,
Yep.
and if I wasn't recording, then it was just a day where I did email. And then planning things, I would have to go back in my head and say, okay, we're recording then. So that is definitely a Monday.
Well, yeah, but even email, you get, look, I may be just saying too much here, but even email, I remember moments where I sat and looked at my email for way too long, like a single draft, just going, I think I know what I want to say here. And then try and write it and just not be happy with it. And then I'm just.
Oh, well, then you end up with all those like drafts and or half finished tabs open. And then it just starts to get a little bit out of control. So yeah, I'm with you there too.
We had a lost time of brain fogs.
It's true. It's true. It reminds me of there was something almost ghost-like about that existence. It reminds me of the film The Others, wherein the protagonists are moving through this world that they do not quite understand, and then the passage of time becomes unclear. Don't want to spoil it, but it's a good show. So this is kind of terrifying, because it means that even if you have done your absolute best, you've done everything right, you could still somehow get infected by this thing. And depending on the severity, you could experience as much as a 7-point drop in your intelligence as measured in terms of IQ. This doesn't seem fair. Of course, life is not known for being particularly fair, but still, it seems like a crappy deal, doesn't it? I looked into more of this because I wanted to check out the methodology of the study. And if you are currently scared or a little bit spooked out by this, and you should be, then keep listening, because we're going to take apart some parts of this.
And also, let's just keep in mind, this is one study. There's going to be lots of studies into this. There's probably another study equally as scientifically rigorous that says something that's the complete opposite. So I mean, let's not get too terrified or shaking in our boots about, oh God, I had COVID, or somebody I know has COVID, and that means they're going to gradually become brain dead over time. Like, I don't think that's what anyone's saying. Or
no.
Yeah.
No, not at all. And because to say something like that, we would need better longitudinal tests. We would need monitoring over a much longer span of time. So when people who were in their 30s when the pandemic struck, when they're maybe in their 60s or 70s, right, then we can have enough information to look back and see whether a correlation exists over the long term. Which sounds like I'm throwing a lot of gobbledygook at you. But the point is remain calm, chins up, don't panic yet. Let's bust some holes in this study as well. So what did I say? 81,337 participants. 12,689 said they had COVID with some degree of respiratory severity. So there were other people who were probably asymptomatic. They didn't know it. Maybe they didn't get tested. there was a very small subset of people, only 275 people, who did the intelligence test both before and after contracting COVID-19. So the study mostly employed what is called a cross-sectional methodology. This is the right thing to do in this case, as long as we remember it limits your ability to draw solid conclusions about cause and effect. So this is a large sample size for initial research, but we have to ask ourselves whether there are other factors working in tandem with this loss of intelligence. Also, we could be getting a bit of a false positive with the idea of contracting COVID leading to lower intelligence, because there might be people who were more who were more likely to read in depth about things like the importance of social distancing or quarantining, right? You could make an argument. I'm not making this. I don't think any of us are making this argument, but you could make an argument that there was some sort of factor there that the study is not designed, right, to understand. But what this means to me, and I think you guys will agree, but what this means to me is that there's potential for long-term effects of COVID that we do not know yet, that we do not understand. You can find, unfortunately, no shortage of anecdotes from people who are saying, yeah, I've got the antibodies. COVID is out of my system, but now I'm experiencing long COVID. The infection left, but the symptoms remained. And studies are still happening on this. The idea that you still have fatigue, that you still have brain fog, cough, chest, stomach pain, headaches that come and go, and of course, difficulty breathing. But we don't know yet. We don't know how much of that is directly related to COVID versus a person's pre-existing lifestyle. We don't know how much of that is related to the trauma, the psychological trauma of surviving a pandemic, the physical trauma of surviving a disease. And at this point, we're not going to know until more research is done, if that is, you believe the science and the direction it's heading in now is the right one, and I'm lucky to say, like, I know several people who have experienced COVID, luckily none to ventilator level, but we have a colleague who was tremendously safe to the utmost degree, and after this person's pod got vaccinated, they all got together for a celebration, for a holiday. And they were all either vaccinated or had previously had COVID and gotten to the other side of it, or so they thought, because of this very small gathering, maybe 10 or so people, 50% of them, including our friend, contracted this infection. So it's nothing to play with, especially because we don't know the symptoms yet, but it does appear that there may be long-term cognitive consequences.
Well, and thankfully, in the situation you're describing, the symptoms were practically non-existent. I mean, there were some very minor symptoms. There was some loss of taste and smell, some of the ones that, got a lot of press, but really nothing debilitating, nothing along the lines of ventilator or hospitalization. But it does appear that the vaccine still protects you against symptoms, extreme symptoms, even from the variant.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, Pfizer in particular is all about the possibility of a third booster shot. Hopefully that's because the science is there. Also, Pfizer's a private entity, so it's not like they're doing it for free.